Hello, I'm Imara Jones, host of a series of conversations here at the People Summit in Chicago, a gathering of progressives from around the country on behalf of Free Speech Television, where we've taken the opportunity to have this amazing collection of thought leaders and activists to talk about a host of critical issues that we're facing at this extremely important time. Now, the speakers at this particular People Summit have ranged from Bernie Sanders to Van Jones to Naomi Klein to Katrina Vanden Heuvel, who is Sarah's boss. But we wanted to take this particular moment as journalists to have a roundtable about what we have seen and experienced and to just put a cap on this year's People Summit. The theme this year is Beyond Resistance, so we're going to talk about whether or not we believe we have moved beyond resistance and a lot of other things that strike us. So we want to thank you for joining us on this Facebook Live broadcast. First, I'd like to introduce Sarah Leonard, who is the features editor at The Nation magazine. As I mentioned, we spoke to your boss yesterday. She had great things to say about you.
Great lady.
And also Jack Smith IV. Where's your crown? I know. It's a regal name.
Honestly, the only reason the number is there is because otherwise I'd be Jack Smith and it'd be impossible to Google. I'd be like an anonymous person.
That's actually true. You're quite easy to find. Who's a senior writer at Mike. Now, in full disclosure, I have both written for The Nation and Mike, so at some point we've all had money come from the same place. Probably the right-wing people are out there thinking that it's George Soros. Think again, my young Padawan, different sources of money, but yeah, anytime he wishes, but I just want to give full disclosure. Let's begin at the headline, one of the headlines from last night, which was the talk by Bernie Sanders. And I want to hear what your thoughts are about what you saw and heard, particularly as people who followed the election and followed him for a long time and followed progressives. I think the thing that struck me about it is that it sounded just like a stump speech. It's as if the 2016 election didn't stop. And as a matter of fact, we were in the press pen, and behind me were people who are attendees at the People Summit, and they were quoting passages from the speech, which means that this is his stump speech that they've heard 1,000 times. And they were it was what, 4,000 people in the room, some incredible number. And they were just as fired up as if it was March 2016 or whatever. So I'm wondering what your impressions were. Sarah, you want to start first?
Sure. One difference I thought in the speech was that he was shouting out candidates who have now run sort of under his mantle, and many of them have won.
That's true.
At the very local level.
And lost.
And he shouted out the
a lot of people that lost.
Like, good campaign. And so he's trying to translate, obviously, his stump speech and his campaigning style from the election, which was surprisingly successful, into success for a lot of people who are not him.
Right.
But I will say that I don't know that Bernie's special strength has ever been his extremely unique speech giving. Mm-hmm. I think what it speaks to is that his platform and honesty, but really the platform, really speaks to young people in particular. It doesn't matter if you get up there and give the same speech 100 times. I also was sitting there and was kind of like, I think I've heard this before. But you know what? I'm still into single payer. So I think it speaks to the strength of the actual message rather than some sort of personality-driven charisma, even though that's what a lot of people accuse him of.
Although, to be fair, when we walked into the hall last night, there was a giant cartoon rendering of his hair and glasses.
Oh,
so
yeah,
there is a bit of the personality, yeah.
It's largely Bernie's event, right? And to the extent that that's in the air.
Right.
But the funny thing is I think it's interesting that you pull out the sort of the new Bernie-crat class of politicians running at various levels. You said beyond resistance. The interesting question is are the people in the room beyond Bernie? Because one of the things I'm going to steal artfully from another journalist I was talking to here who said, take a straw poll of the room and ask who everybody's number two is. Ask people who they think of for 2020 beyond Bernie. Ask who people see as the next visionary sort of leaders. And I think that's what people are maybe nervously not addressing as seriously as they could be right now, which is who leads next? Which is, I think, a very exciting question that I worry maybe we didn't come away I didn't come away with a new class of Bernie-crat celebrities so much as I got to hear from our pantheon of old 2016 favorites.
What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's actually going to be crucial that we move beyond Bernie for a bunch of obvious reasons. Bernie is great, but one man is never going to look like America. And Bernie in particular, I love him. He's old, he's white, he sounds like super awkward around like gender, race, sexuality. It's just not his terrain. And I think my hope is that what his campaign will have done and what we're seeing with the new people who are running is that there's a younger generation that's actually really comfortable with like what America looks like and not just Vermont, and also is committed to a program that has been lifted up and legitimized by the Bernie Sanders campaign, and they have gotten some amount of campaign training and know-how from getting on board with a candidate that they actually liked, and now they're more experienced in politics. I do think that there's a pretty big gap between Bernie and anyone who could take his place in terms of name recognition, reputation, political experience. So I would agree that's a problem we're confronting. I think it's something they're trying to address with these local candidates, so there's a deeper bench. But definitely no one expected the Bernie campaign, and we're starting a little bit from scratch on that front.
I mean, I want to talk about some of the issues that you both just touched upon in terms of where we go from here and on issues of diversity at this conference, which are quite real. But what's interesting to me is overall is how the 2016 election hasn't ended, because it's not only Bernie Sanders. I mean, I had someone come to this studio today, which is open to everyone at the convention in terms of being able to see what's going on. And she told me, she's like, I am from X organization, I won't name them, and we are fighting in court to get Bernie Sanders' fraud votes counted for the primary, and we are doing it in X states, because if he had 3 million more votes, we would have turned around. I mean, and she spoke to me for 10 minutes passionately. And there's a sense in which the 2016 election isn't over. And it's not only true for Bernie, it's true for Donald Trump, the way that he continues to talk about his win over Hillary Clinton. And, the first thing out of his mouth, apparently, when you visit him is, hello, my name is Donald Trump, and I won the popular vote by 3 million votes, which is clearly not true. Nancy Pelosi said that was the first thing he said to her when she went to the White House for the first time. And secondly, it's also true for Hillary Clinton, who started, I think it's Onward Together or something, her legacy organization that's giving money to other organizations, and she's out there on the stump. I mean, this election is still carrying on.
Yeah. Well, I think there are a lot of ways in which this election surfaced a lot of divisions without resolving them.
That's right.
And it's not like
that's right.
Those divisions weren't there before, but boy, did we get a full view of them over the last several months, or the last couple of years.
Right.
So, I mean, it speaks to a lot of work that we have to do. I don't think that relitigating the vote from the Bernie perspective, from the Trump perspective, is remotely helpful. And I also think that the problem with Hillary sort of coming back into the spotlight is that the Clinton wing of the Democratic Party, which is not just the Clintons, it's a lot of other people too, now kind of Obama, as we saw in the DNC election. That side of the party really screwed up this election. And what they've been told by the Democratic base and by a lot of young people specifically, who are the future, is that we need a sort of populist program. We favor more populist candidates. We need a serious revision and a pushing back of that wing of the party. And so if they want to bring her back on, it's basically saying, no, we think things are fine the way they are, and we plan on losing elections for the foreseeable future, which is not all that encouraging. So I actually think we have to embrace these divisions, really look at them. And the challenge for the left is, can we communicate with other people who feel disillusioned with the political system, including Trump voters, and can we show them that our answers to those problems, things like single payer, free tuition, whatever, are going to be beneficial to them, are things that they want, are things that are fair, that make sense, and can we build that coalition out? I don't think when we go back and try to relitigate the vote, we're avoiding the much harder work.
Right, and so on that point, while there are tens of millions of people still fighting the last election, it's like people from the Civil War who couldn't let it go or whatever. as we've brought up several times, that the future is what's important. One of the things that has struck me about this, exactly what you spoke about, some of the discomfort around issues of race and sexuality and other things that can be inherent to progressive movements and what they struggle on, was brought up to me today by Naomi Klein, who said, look, we honestly, if there's a failure in the Hillary campaign, there was also a failure in the progressive movement. That if Bernie Sanders and 4 key states had gotten a majority of black votes, he would have been the nominee and he probably would have been president. And so we have a lot of work to do on racial justice. And then another person that I spoke to who's on the board of People's Action interviewed, Maria Elena Latona, said this exact same thing. And so I wanted to have a sense of what you thought, because on the surface, the program was very diverse. So Van Jones and Nina Turner, and I mean, you name it. Just go to the People Summit, and it's incredibly diverse. But as I said to you before we went on, I went to see Van Jones, who gave a talk on racial justice yesterday, and 80% of people in the room were white. Mm-hmm. And that particularly struck me. And one of the producers of our show was saying about how on Twitter that the issue of racial inclusion has been really a subject of fierce, intense debate here. So I'm just wondering, as you've walked around, as you've interviewed people, of course you are not people of color, but come from organizations that value that and have made a lot of strides on that. What have you observed, and what's been your impressions on that?
So I think you identify a good problem, which I know we were speaking a little earlier, which is, the left will criticize Democrats and centrists and will say, you talk a lot about social justice, but you don't actually have faith that you can center people of color. You don't actually have faith that a guy like Keith Ellison can lead our party and in a way that will expand the tent without alienating people. But the left is unwilling to admit that it also has that insecurity.
Right.
That it also exhibits that problem. As for it's a huge issue. It's good to see there is a degree to which I didn't see this conference last year. I've heard things have improved. But one of the things that, it comes from also this idea about the Beyond Bernie thing, one of the things that would be nice and could address this problem is a baton pass. What would have been nicer to see, and I hate to sound like a broken record, is a real debut of a new class of leaders, because that would be a helpful way to center new voices, and women and LGBTQ people and people of color would be to create an environment in which we talk about being beyond Bernie, and we really center not just those groups by including them, but explicitly centering them by debuting them in a new class of leaders.
That's right. I mean, what's interesting to me is that, and I want to come to you, but this just struck me, is that there were none of his colleagues here, which I thought was interesting. His younger colleagues, like Kamala Harris, I would think would be an interesting person to be here and to have on. There are also, Congressman Ro Khanna and Congressman Jayapal, who's from Seattle. There were other people of color that were here, but as you say, they weren't rolled up and packaged and said, hey, there are lots of other people that we need to be thinking about for the future. Even a ceremonial baton pass in that way.
I think that's right.
Vangelis is here.
Yeah, that's true. But that's what's helpful, because when you talk about people, we've got the Hillary clans and the Hillary fans and the Bernie fans, and look, 10 years from now, we're going to still have people litigating the 2016 primary. There's going to be they're going to be the codgers. They're going to be hanging around. But celebrity is valuable. So and that's what's been powerful here and for Bernie, and why some of the official merchandise is the Bernie hairline logo. Right. Celebrity's very powerful, but the left needs to develop new celebrities, and that's a great opportunity to build inclusion.
What do you think?
Yeah, so I'll push back on that a little, actually, because of course I think everyone agrees that
that's good. It makes good television when people don't agree.
Yeah, sure.
So fight.
Please.
I'll try to keep it verbal. So I think everyone agrees, of course, that we need a new generation of leaders. We're lost without that. And I would disagree that the left is not willing to admit it has problems with diversity and inclusion, because I think the left is constantly fraught on that point. Maybe unsuccessful in fixing the problem often, but certainly thinking about it. What I saw in the first big plenary here was not Bernie or any of the people we've seen on a national level, but people like Dante Berry, Linda Sarsour, people who actually are rising local leaders, largely working communities of color, being pushed to the fore in the very first plenary that was packed. And so I actually liked seeing that. And then today, or I think it was yesterday, there was a breakout group on electoral politics. It included some of these local candidates talking about their
state by state, actually. It's one for every state.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that was really encouraging to me, and I actually think that's the cultivation and promotion of a next generation of leaders that we want to see. And I would say that that lineup of leaders did look like America. That's what we want American socialism to look like. So I actually think that that is happening here. I think that we also are, it's certainly not perfect. And I think that we want to be conscious that something is building here in fits and starts. It's not going to look perfect on year 2, unfortunately. And that I think most of the people here are pretty committed to going in the direction that you described, where we are improving on these points. I've seen very little of people just being like, why are people talking about identity politics? Which of course makes my skin crawl. I haven't seen that here, honestly. It doesn't mean there aren't people here who feel that way, but honestly that hasn't been the vibe here. I was encouraged that the stage was diverse, because I think that actually sends a very important message.
The stage was diverse. Yeah.
And I think that obviously tons of work needs to be done to follow up on the commitment represented by the stage. So, I don't know.
That's right.
I've been encouraged. I wouldn't say everything, of course, is perfect.
Yeah. The thing that drives me crazy about the identity politics line, what makes me crazy is that all politics is identity politics.
Certainly in America.
I mean, and what I mean by that is that if for some reason you care about economic justice because, as we had yesterday, Bianca Cunningham was fired from her job for trying to advocate better working conditions for when she was earning $10 an hour at Verizon. Like, economic justice is an identity politics. Whatever politics you have is based upon your personal experience. So what we have actually is a conversation about which identity politics is more legitimate, not whether or not identity politics is how you got into, were brought to political life.
Well, I think some of the damage that was done by the 2016 election was because Hillary Clinton wanted to claim feminism and then sort of wanted to claim intersectionality, whatever that means to her. What she was doing was sort of playing I would say sort of a game where you affiliate yourself with what you're calling identity politics, which sounds like you are interested in people other than yourself, which is good, but she always drops the economics out. So, intersections also involve class, obviously.
That's right.
And so she wanted to put out t-shirts that said, like, mi abuela, but she, cut welfare, et cetera, did all the things that make it impossible for working moms. And so, what was infuriating about that was a sort of what I would consider a sort of co-optation of the idea of identity politics, which I also value, into something that was a politics that would not benefit the people she's claiming to represent. Yeah. And so that drove me insane, and I think it also sent the left into a spiral where suddenly like all identity politics were bad, which also is totally unhelpful.
That's true. I mean, yeah, I want to move on to another question about what surprised you versus leaving than what you thought coming in. But just on that point, I just think that it's fair. I think one of the things that happened is Hillary Clinton has a long, record in public life, and in a lot of ways in the campaign, and it's a campaign, you're supposed to condense and distort the person's record. That's how you're going to win, right, from the other side. But it's also true that there were a lot of things that were controversial that she did as president, but then also one of the things that she did in Arkansas was to totally reform school funding. That was a very explicit move to give black rural areas more, to redo the school formula so that black rural children could get more. That had never been equal since before Jim Crow, and that's one of the things that she actually led. But again, everyone's record has to be put against the entire span, and it's not the job of Bernie Sanders to be making the case for her in any way, or vice versa. But I don't, again, we've spent probably 10 minutes of the show talking about the last election, and that's because I think it's palpable that in so many ways here it hasn't ended. Coming into it, what were the things that you all thought that you were going to be covering? You prepared to write. You kind of was like, okay, I know this is going to be it, and that's what you came in with. And then when you're leaving, you're totally surprised, and there's a totally new idea or series of things that surprised your new expectations. So we'll start with you, since we started with
Go ahead, please.
Well, I did one session with DSA, Democratic Socialists, and I was extremely charmed because there are all these new members, and
They're fun.
They are fun.
They're incredibly fun.
They are
by the way.
super
I'll
fun.
add that.
You hear that? We're fun. And so what I sort of liked was there were all these like pretty brand new people. I was talking to one woman. She was like, well, I campaigned for Obama, and I was not the second time, and I was knocking on people's doors, and she lives in Pittsburgh, and they were saying like, what has he done for me? They were pissed. And she felt like she was getting a little bit of the early blowback that we're going to experience in this election. And she, it sort of started to challenge her own views about her own campaigning, and she started looking around, she started moving to the left, and she ended up in DSA and participating in the women's strike on International Women's Day. And now she is the co-chair of her chapter. And so she's been in DSA maybe like 8 months, and I was astonished at how fast everyone was moving. They're like working on campaigns, they're ready to go. She is the co-chair, and they do like lots of progressive things. They have ground rules, some of the DSA people I know in California, and definitely people I know elsewhere. Everyone like starts meetings with like ground rules, preferred gender pronouns, like this like famously sort of like economically oriented organization that never seemed like it quite meshed with like modern identity politics, like totally does now, just because all these young people showed up. And like that to me was a delight. I thought that was very, very promising.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's right.
And I by the way, I'll talk about what my expectations were coming in.
Right.
But I also want to add that I think that's one of the more promising things to encounter here is the left 10 years ago was kind of a miserable place to be.
It was morebound.
And
No free drinks.
the jubilance, the excitement is very real.
That's absolutely
If
the
you
case.
talk to people who are movement scholars of the anti-war movement in the 60s, they will talk about how Nixon's second inaugural protest was a rager. They turned DC into a party. And but when people talk about how fun the DSA people are, that could be one of the top indicators of the energy they carry forward. The jubilance is like, it's funny to talk about how like all the parties and how fun it is, but it's so valuable that culture is being created. But back to all the movement stuff. One of the things that I expected coming in, and the expectation that was kind of met, was this idea that the unspoken mission here, a lot of times you saw it in Bernie's speech, you see it in the titles of a number of the sessions and the panels, is the idea that the project of the left is now to win back the Trump voters, right? Is to do the work. That's like the thing that is if you talk about, what do we really need to do? And it's been true since day one. As being in a newsroom on election night, the first thing I did when we wake up in the morning is call all the organizers and ask, what is the number one weakness right now? What's up with you guys, and what do you think everybody needs to work on? And ubiquitously people said things like rural outreach, recentering, winning back the working class politics Democrats lost, and that is present. That happened in Bernie's speech. It's happening in the panels. I'm not, whether or not this conference has sufficiently prepared people for that mission is different.
Can I add a coda to that, though, which is that I think we talk a lot about Trump voters, and there are different kinds of Trump voters,
Yes.
and some of them we want, and some of them we don't care about at all. And I would say that, like, you know, okay, obviously, like, hardcore racists are out. Like, we don't want Richard Spencer. Like, there's no room for that. But more importantly, talking about big groups of people, the median income of the Trump voter was $72K. Right?
That's exactly right.
So we're talking about like small business owners, petty bourgeois, people who employ other people, bosses, right? They're less likely to come over to Democrats than actual working class people who work for bosses. And we're talking about, Van Jones talked a lot about coal miners. Any working class person who is suffering for a boss is ultimately, in the end, someone we want to win over, and someone who we hope we are building policies that will support those people. And so I think those are people we want to win over, but we have to draw this distinction because otherwise we get confused.
Yeah, I think that for me,
yeah.
I one of the things I've been kind of raging against is I think there's a fetishization of the Trump voter because it plays into the idea of what people think America is or ought to be, like the white working class person.
Like authenticity.
And there's an attraction to that, but it's also the case that in this election, if we had done better with Latinos, if there had been some of these marginal shifts, then that could also be it. But that's not held up in the exact same way. Well, I'm getting the wrap signal, and so I want to just land on what the conference is about. So, my question to you both in the end is the title of the conference is Beyond Resistance. And I'm wondering, in closing, do you feel that this has moved beyond resistance?
And in addressing the last thing you said, to move beyond resistance, Becky Bond talks about two things. She talks about two parts of organizing. There's mobilization, there's the energy. The energy's not gone, the energy's fine, the energy's here, and there's base expansion. And people need to understand what that means to bring more people in. And you're right, the fetishization of the white working class voter is the problem, when really we could be talking about voter registration that brings more people into the rolls, bringing people of color into more of them into the coalition that Bernie helped reveal.
That's right.
Which has been said a number of times here. We will, as Sarah was so wise to say, it's such a long game. Right, and that's such a weak answer too, but it's such a long game. We won't know for a while. We'll only get the ability to look back and say that the work was done well or not well.
That's right. So really quickly, have we moved beyond resistance in this conference? Have you seen?
Yeah, I mean, I think what gave the tagline for the conference credibility is that it is largely made up of sponsoring organizations that have been doing this work since before this election. So they've always been beyond resistance. And what's encouraging is a lot of the new people who have been politically activated by being shocked at what has happened. The goal is for those people to join up with the people who have been doing the work all along, not reinvent the wheel. And what I liked about seeing the multi-generational character of this conference is it seems like that is, at least to some degree, happening. People are joining organizations and getting politically educated instead of just like flinging themselves against Trump. And that's what we want.
That's right.
So I think that's the kernel of like a beyond resistance mentality.
Right. And just in conclusion, I think that one of the things that struck me about Beyond Resistance is that aside from the massive plenary sessions, almost all the breakout sessions are about root and branch, unsexy, difficult organizing. And they really have focused on that. Well, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. Sarah Leonard of The Nation and Jack Smith IV of Mike. Be sure to follow them both on the internets. And again, my name is Imara Jones, hosting a series of conversations here. This has been for FSTV. This is our press roundtable and roundup of the People Summit. Make sure you go to freespeechtv.com in order to get the latest. Also visit us on our Facebook page, where a series of interviews interviews are there and posted. And have a great day. One more thing is be sure to go to the People Summit website where you can go and see for yourself a lot of the conversations that are recorded and things that we're talking about to make up your own mind as to whether or not anything we said made sense. So have a great weekend and thank you for joining us.